So I'm just going to say hi to everybody. Thank you all for joining. I just didn't want to be a faceless in the back here. So, but I am going to switch over to my PowerPoint so that you can follow along here. So again, thank you all for joining, and I hope you've had some really good informative sessions over the last couple of days. It's such a great event. So my name is Kelly Linton. My business is Drive Coaching and Consulting, and I am a wealth coach and a certified financial planner. So a little bit about me. My background is I've been in the wealth management business for the last 18 plus years as a former investment advisor for a good portion of that. In 2014, I sold my book of business, and I took a couple years off and was with my son, and then I started Drive. So I kind of bring a different and a unique perspective to sort of women, finances, and taking control of their wealth. So part of what I do as a financial planner is I work fee for service. So I really am involved in the financial planning process. I'm not licensed to give investment advice. So my work is strictly around sort of building out, working with women, mostly women, not exclusively, but majority of women, to get clear sort of on their goals, their objectives, and then we lay out the financial plan. And my process really works through sort of the major pillars of financial planning. So it really is specialized. It's not sort of a one size fits all process, because obviously everybody is unique and individual. And so hence, so should your financial plan be. So that's just a little bit about me and sort of my background. So just some statistics to take a look at in terms of women and wealth and why it is important, no matter what your situation is, as a woman, to sort of take control of your finances. So by 2026, women in Canada will control close to half of all accumulated financial wealth. And this is a pretty significant increase from even a decade earlier. At some point, as women, we're going to be the sole financial decision maker. So almost at 90%, it's a pretty high percentage. At some point in your life, you're going to be sort of in control of that financial decision making. We also know that women on average live longer than our male counterparts. We also have more time potentially out of the workforce for things such as pregnancy, childcare. Even when parents age, typically it's the female that is looking after, or arranging, or caring for aging parents. And certainly we saw sort of the fallout of that from the pandemic, and the number of women that either left the workforce or ended up sort of going into a more part-time position. So again, just sort of reiterates how important it is to take control of your money. And, you know, the statistic I think a lot of people are familiar with, we still earn on average less than our male counterparts. So again, all of this sort of just to paint the picture of why it is so important as females that we take control of our financial future. So wealth is power, essentially. Whether we like it or not, it is. So this is just a quote from the CEO and co-founder of Ellevest, which is a financial fintech sort of company out of the US. So, you know, you can read the quote. We all know money is power. Women won't be equal with men until we are financially equal with men. So getting more money into the hands of women is good for women, but it also is good for families, the economy, and for society. So we see that then trickle down effect. So why is building a financial plan important? So a lot of times when I start working with clients, they will ask me, these are some of the questions that they'll sort of come to the table with. So, you know, where should I start? I don't even really have a handle on my current situation. How should I consider paying down debt? How do I really plan for my future, for retirement? Should I contribute to an RSP or pay down my mortgage? That's a big one that sort of financial planning can work through. What's the best way to save for a house down payment? That, of course, is a very timely one for many individuals looking to buy a house in this ever increasing housing market. How much do I really need to save on a monthly or annual basis for my retirement? How can I minimize taxes? What happens if I don't have a will or power of attorney, and what is that and why do I need them? So those are like, there's other obviously questions, but those are some of the typical questions where if you're asking yourself some of those questions, it's probably time to think about whether it's working with somebody like myself, another wealth professional, or even some of it you can do on your own to start thinking about building out a financial plan. So where do I start? So typically the first thing that I do when I work with clients, but again, this is something that everybody can do on their own. So in the financial industry, wealth management industry, we do like to make things super complicated. Some of the stuff is pretty basic. It doesn't, you can take it to the nth degree of complication, but to do a simple net worth statement, as I said, anybody can do this. You can pull up an Excel spreadsheet, you can get out a pen and paper and figure out what your net worth is. So basically a net worth statement is just a snapshot of baseline of where you are currently at. So it's your starting point of where you are now, and then where do you sort of want to be. So net worth looks at your assets, so anything you own of value, so cash, property, investments. It looks at your liabilities, so debt, whether that's credit cards, car loan, mortgage payments. And in the simplest and purest terms, your net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. And the idea of doing the net worth statement is so that you can see over time how you progress. So ideally, you know, it will change and increase over time. So in your 20s and 30s, your net worth may not be as significant as it is when you get into your 40s and your 50s and your sort of peak earning years. So you want to kind of gauge that over time, right? And you know, you should review it sort of on an annual basis. I say if you're under 40, you maybe don't need to review it annually, just because there's a lot of things that will change. But certainly once you're sort of in that 40 plus age bracket, it's something to just sort of check in on an annual basis. But irregardless of whatever age bracket you're in, you should, with any sort of major life changes, look at doing a review and making adjustments. So, you know, divorce, having a child, maybe death of a parent, death of a spouse, any of those kind of things would be a trigger point to sort of say it's time to do a review of my net worth statement. So this next snapshot is, again, just a very simple net worth statement. So you can see, and I kept it really simple, obviously, just for this purposes, right? It doesn't need to be super complicated. Take out your assets, figure out what those are, give it a valuation as of whatever the date is, and then do the same thing for your liabilities, and, you know, take assets minus liabilities, and you'll see your bottom line net worth. So the next thing that is important in terms of building out your sort of financial roadmap or your financial plan is looking at, obviously, where does your money go? So we call that a cash flow statement. Essentially, it's income versus expenses, right? So it's a measure either monthly or annually of all your cash inflows. So whether that's income or self-employed income, or if you have other investment income, all the inflows minus any of your outflows or expenses. And this is, of course, is important. So it gives you, will show you really where your money is going, and will also break out for you, what are you spending percentage-wise, say, on your rent or mortgage, versus percentage-wise, what are you putting towards savings or investing? So that gives you sort of a picture to be able to make a determination of where your spending is happening and where potentially you can make some adjustments. So if, for example, you do this and you see that, you know, your discretionary spending, so spending around things like maybe shopping or traveling or all the sort of fun things, I guess, of life, you see that maybe there's somewhere in there where you can sort of adjust that to put, you know, a certain percentage towards investing for your future. So again, it's all about getting that picture so that you can start to build the plan around saving and investing. And also, you know, if you have significant debt, you're looking at how to either pay down that debt, consolidate debt, what's the best strategy. And again, so this again, very simple cash flow statement. So just taking all income minus expenses and looking at net cash flow. So in this example, this is on an annualized basis. So we see that it's 28,000 and change. So we know just from this exercise alone, there's excess income there to be able to either allocate to further towards debt repayment and or towards increasing savings and investing. So, and it, again, you can see this is pretty straightforward. Anybody can do this, right? So you can just sort of lay out this whole process for yourself, or as I said, and or you work with a professional to do it. But again, this part of things does not have to be super complicated. So the next step is really goal setting for your future. So this, I do spend a fair bit of time with clients on, just getting very clear and specific of what your goals are, both short and long term. So when I say specific, I mean pretty going pretty deep to figure out the details around that. So people will always say to me, oh, I want to retire at 55, or I want to retire at 65. And part of my process and asking them questions is, okay, what does that really mean though? Does that mean that you're going to retire at 55 with $65,000 income? Is that before tax, after tax? Are you going to stay in your same house? Are you going to downsize? Are you going to move somewhere else? Are you going to keep your cottage if you have a cottage? Are you going to travel? What does traveling look like? So you can see it's not just, it's easy to sort of say, oh, I want to retire at 55, but you have to really drill down to what that looks like. And of course, everybody's idea of what they need to retire on and live on is completely different. And part of the process of going through a plan is to figure out, what do you actually need? Is there gaps? Where is there potential shortfalls? And then what are the strategies we can do to sort of mediate that? And typically you'll look at sort of 3 timelines. So short term is considered 1 to 3 years, medium term 3 to 10 years, and then long term 10 years plus. So you'll have sort of those goals along the way. And then once you have very clear goals and objectives, you can start to think about what your investment options and asset mix are. So you can't do it, a lot of times people try to do it the other way, but you really have to get clear on the goals first in order to be able to build out that plan. And then you also need to think about your risk tolerance, which will come more into play in terms of the investment side of things, but how comfortable are you in taking risk? What kind of risk do you need to take? So typically, people are pretty comfortable at taking risk in their investments when things continue to go up and up and up. When we see markets potentially pull back, people's risk tolerance may change. So those are the kind of things you need to sort of think about longer term. And then working on a plan will also help you build out your asset allocation mix. And so asset allocation mix is really just your percentage of your investments that should be in cash, the percentage in fixed income, so things like bonds, or equity, percentage in equity, so stocks, ETF, mutual funds, etc. So, and that's part of the process that I go through, is just giving high level sort of what your asset allocation should be based on sort of your timelines and the things we've discussed. And then once you know that asset allocation, your timelines, your risk tolerance, you put that all together, then you can start looking at sort of the investment vehicles. Should you put money into a TFSA or to an RSP? What are the pros and cons? Should you do both? And it's looking at sort of what are your resources and what's the best way to proceed. And then finally, that dictates sort of your investment options moving forward as well. So the next part of the process in terms of the sort of financial planning, after you've kind of gone through those first 3 steps, we want to look at insurance. So really insurance is just part of risk management, and it should form part of your financial plan. It's part of protecting and managing your wealth. So looking at a plan, typically we look at sort of the 3 big types of life insurance or types of insurance. So life insurance, disability insurance, and critical illness insurance. There are many different other types of insurance out there, but those are kind of the 3 big ones for most people to sort of address. If you own your own business, small business owner, then there's other sort of insurance and coverage we would talk about and have some conversation around. So life insurance, I think most people know, covers off the risk of death payable to a beneficiary or beneficiaries. So we look at what sort of the risk of that is for you, right? And then we sort of make a determination of what should be the appropriate type of coverage. Disability insurance provides coverage should you become disabled and unable to continue working. There is many different types of disability insurance out there, and disability typically is much more expensive than life insurance, or I should say term life insurance. So, but again, if all of a sudden you're unable to work for the next 5 years, is that a risk that you want to ensure you've covered off? And then critical illness is a lump sum payout should you be diagnosed with a life-altering illness. So if you're employed, most individuals have some form of group life insurance and disability coverage through their employer. So that's part of what we look at, whether it's 1 times salary, 2 times salary, whatever the breakout is. And then make a determination of, is that adequate, or do we need to look at potentially other independent insurance? And then self-employed individuals, obviously, most times, not always, but pretty much, don't have obviously any type of group insurance, so they have to put their own policies in place. And sometimes we can find options through group associations for that, but it becomes probably more critical for them because they have no type of coverage generally in place. So taxes, that's a big one that obviously everybody would like to know how they can pay less taxes. And really the first part of going through the plan is really to help individuals understand how much you actually are paying in taxes. And then looking at what are some strategies to minimize your taxes. So putting money into an RSP, either monthly or on an annual basis, to reduce your tax burden, reduces your taxable income. That's a strategy. Different types of income are taxed differently. So dividend income is taxed more preferably than salary income. So are there opportunities there to look at different ways to potentially minimize tax? And then self-employed individuals, because being self-employed, you have the ability to have different deductions, can also look at ways to minimize your tax. So we cover all of that as we go through sort of the planning process. And then finally, we look at estate planning, and estate planning is just essentially how your assets will be handled upon your death. So this part of the financial planning process, isn't sort of really the fun part, but it is a really necessary and critical part. So we look at sort of the most efficient ways for things to be set up, for assets to be distributed upon your death. And then, part of my job, I'm not a lawyer, but I obviously work with a number of lawyers to ensure that you do have a will, that it's an up-to-date will. So, sometimes people do a will, I don't know, they get married, that's sort of is a bit of a trigger, but then, 20 years later, maybe they're still married, maybe they're not, they've had kids. Like a whole lot can happen in 20 years. So you want to make sure that even if you've once done a will, that you've then gone back and either added a codicil or, updated the will completely. And obviously a lawyer can recommend what the best route would be for that. And then also ensuring you have, the lawyers or your lawyer do up powers of attorney. So powers of attorney for personal care and property. So personal care is a power of attorney that can be, spouse, can be parent, that if something happens to you and you're incapacitated, that they have the ability to manage that on your behalf, and the same with property. So typically when you go to do your will, most lawyers, it's part of the whole package to do a will and the 2 powers of attorney, right? So, and again, not most people don't ever want to think about this, but part of a full sort of comprehensive financial plan is making sure that you have those pieces in place. So essentially then you're just so when I work with clients, we go through this process, usually sort of this process that I just walked you through today takes a good probably hour and a half to 2 hours that I sit and work with. Now it's virtually, but it used to be sit with clients, and just kind of go through everything. I have a checklist that I ask people to provide, and we just work through each component and kind of drill down to what we sort of are looking for in terms of outcome. And I take all that information away and then come back with sort of a plan. And even then, it's not, they're recommendations, but then we talk about sort of the best strategies to make sure that these things get implemented, because it's easy to do the plan, but then if you don't actually execute, there's not a lot of value. So part of my process is making sure that we put you in touch with the right people to execute, and that, we continue to sort of monitor that process for the next number of months. So that is it for me. Thank you all for your time. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm just gonna